They auctioned a Comanche mother with her baby until a white rancher raised his hand first. A profound silence fell, a hush heavier than any winter frost, as the gavel hovered above the dusty block. The air in that Texas town, thick with the scent of dried sweat and unfulfilled promise, seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't merely the sale of chattel. It was the brutal severing of souls, a testament to an era steeped in raw injustice, where human lives were bartered like livestock under an indifferent sun. A stark reality, etched onto the hard-scrabble earth, where the cries of the voiceless often vanished into the vast, indifferent sky. This is not a tale of simple heroism, nor one of easy answers. It is a chronicle of shadows and light, of choices made in the crucible of an unforgiving landscape, and the ripple effects that spread through lives irrevocably altered. A story about the depths of despair and the fragile tendrils of hope that sometimes, against all odds, refuse to die. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The year was 1874. The dust of the Red River War still settling like a shroud over the plains, coating everything with a grim film of defeat and resentment. Elias Thorne, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten battles and silent burdens, stood at the periphery of the crowd, his gaze unblinking, yet seeing more than the scene before him. He was a rancher, solitary by nature, his land carved out of the unforgiving West, with calloused hands and a will as stubborn as the ancient mesquite. Today, however, his usual stoicism was a fragile veneer. The auction was an ordinary spectacle in these parts, the sale of goods, livestock, and, as the prevailing cruelty dictated, human beings. But the item on the block today was different, resonating with a discordant hum in the depths of Elias's being, a sound that vibrated against the very marrow of his bones. A young Comanche woman, her face a mask of grief and fierce, unbroken defiance, clutched a bundled infant to her chest, her eyes dark and fathomless, darting across the predatory faces of the crowd. Her traditional attire, once vibrant, was now tattered, a stark symbol of her captivity and the systemic crushing of a people. Her name, whispered among the few who knew it, was Nara. The auctioneer, a corpulent man with a voice like gravel scraping against stone, droned on, his words stripping dignity with each syllable. He spoke of her youth, her perceived strength, the value she might bring to any household seeking labor. He omitted, of course, the searing pain, the profound loss, the spirit that still flickered stubbornly within her, despite the profound degradation. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He was no stranger to the harsh realities of the West, had witnessed countless acts of barbarity, but this felt different, more intimate, more profoundly wrong. The child, barely a few months old, let out a soft whimper, a tiny, almost inaudible sound that somehow pierced the din of the market, a fragile plea that seemed to echo in the vast, unfeeling space. It was a sound that tugged at something deep within Elias, something he had long believed to be dead, buried beneath years of solitude and the quiet despair of a life lived on the fringes. He saw the avarice in the eyes of the bidders, the casual cruelty, the complete disregard for the sacred bond between mother and child. A simmering rage, long dormant, began to stir within him, a silent, volcanic eruption of a conscience he thought had been eroded by the relentless grind of survival. The sun beat down relentlessly, mirroring the oppressive weight of the moment. The dust swirled, a tangible representation of the unsettled state of the land and its inhabitants, a silent witness to a tragedy unfolding in plain sight. He shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on Nara, a silent question forming in his mind, though he dared not voice it, even to himself. What was he doing here? The initial bids were cautious, tentative, reflecting the lingering suspicion and fear towards anything, or anyone, associated with the recently subdued Comanche tribes. Yet, beneath this veneer of apprehension, an undercurrent of calculated desire rippled through the gathered men. They spoke in low murmurs, their eyes appraising Nara as they would a horse or a sturdy plow, calculating her potential output, her capacity for forced labor. The auctioneer, sensing the hesitation, launched into a more fervent sales pitch, embellishing tales of Comanche resilience and strength. twisting attributes of a proud people into reasons for their servitude. He painted a picture of an unbreakable workforce, conveniently ignoring the humanity that pulsed beneath the tattered garments, the fear that flickered in Nara's haunted eyes. Elias watched, his jaw clenched so tight he could feel the muscles ache. He saw the leering glances, the quiet calculations of men who viewed bodies as commodities, spirits as something to be broken and reshaped. He was not one of them, yet he stood among them, a silent observer in this grotesque tableau. His hands, rough from years of ranch work, felt strangely delicate, powerless. He thought of the tales he'd heard, the whispered atrocities of the war, the brutal displacement of native peoples. He thought of his own past, a series of losses and betrayals that had left him cynical and withdrawn. There was a young woman, a lifetime ago, whose eyes had held a similar flicker of defiance, a spirit he had failed to protect. The memory, sharp and unbidden, pierced through his carefully constructed emotional walls. He saw the child in Nara's arms, its small form a fragile anchor in a storm of cruelty. What future awaited them? A life of relentless servitude, the child stripped of its heritage, its mother reduced to a ghost of herself. The thought was a bitter draught, burning his throat. He saw the rancher from down south, a man known for his harsh hand and unforgiving nature, raising his hand, a casual gesture that sealed a terrible fate. The bid was meager, a mere pittance for 2 lives, yet it hung in the air, unchallenged. The auctioneer's voice swelled, a predatory chant. "Going once, going twice!" The words echoed like the tolling of a funeral bell, each syllable a nail in a coffin he refused to see sealed. A deep, unsettling stillness settled over Elias, a quiet resolve hardening within him. The world, for a moment, seemed to fade, leaving only the woman, the child, and the looming shadow of an inevitable doom. He felt the weight of history, the crushing burden of a land built on dispossession and suffering, pressing down on him. A decision, unbidden and almost involuntary, began to form in the deepest recesses of his being, a rebellion against the prevailing tide of indifference. He looked at the child, a flicker of pure, innocent life, in the arms of utter despair. "Going twice, for the sum of $80. The auctioneer's voice boomed, thick with the certainty of a completed transaction, a future sealed. The small crowd, mostly men with hard, sun-baked faces, shifted restlessly, some eager for the spectacle to end, others silently endorsing the impending transaction. Nara's eyes, fixed on some distant, unseen horizon, held a terrifying resignation. Her grip on her baby tightened, a silent prayer, a desperate act of possession against a world determined to dispossess her of everything. The child stirred, its small hand reaching out, instinctively seeking comfort that seemed utterly absent in this brutal arena. It was this small, innocent gesture, this pure, unadulterated need, that severed the last thread of Elias Thorne's carefully maintained detachment. A jolt, akin to a lightning strike, coursed through him, shattering the icy shell around his heart. The faces of the bidders, the gleam in their eyes, the casual cruelty of the scene, suddenly became intolerable, a grotesque distortion of humanity. Then, a sound, clear and resonant, sliced through the dusty air, a single, decisive word that stopped the auctioneer mid-sentence, causing every head to swivel in unison. 100. The voice was Elias's, rough, unpracticed in such pronouncements, yet carrying an undeniable authority. His hand, calloused and strong, was raised, not in hesitant deliberation, but with an uncharacteristic certainty. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a sudden, stunned silence. Eyes, previously fixed on Nara, now turned towards Elias, filled with a mixture of shock, confusion, and thinly veiled contempt. He was known as a solitary man, a rancher who kept to himself, who rarely ventured into town unless absolutely necessary. His bid was not merely an increase in price, it was a disruption of the natural order, a defiance of unspoken rules. The auctioneer, visibly flustered, stammered, "Thorne, what in the... for a Comanche squaw and her brat?" The derision in his voice was clear, yet Elias met his gaze with an unyielding stare, a silent challenge. Nara, who had seemed to shrink into herself, lifted her head slowly. Her dark eyes, filled with a profound disbelief, locked onto Elias's. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. Not hope, not gratitude, but a primal, disoriented recognition of an unexpected intervention. The sun, previously a malevolent presence, now seemed to cast a strange, ethereal glow upon the scene, highlighting the stark contrast between the darkness of the prevailing sentiment and the sudden, solitary light of Elias's act. He felt the weight of every judging eye, every whispered accusation, but a quiet strength, born of a long-buried conviction, sustained him. The air thrummed with a new tension, a palpable sense of unease, as the auction, for the first time, veered wildly off its predictable course. The silence that followed Elias's winning bid was heavier than any spoken word, thick with unspoken questions and simmering resentments. The townspeople, their faces a mixture of confusion and disapproval, cast furtive glances at Elias, then at Nara, as if trying to decipher the unlikeliest of pairings. Elias felt the weight of their scrutiny, the judgmental gaze of a community that saw his act as an aberration, a strange departure from the accepted norms of their world. He was a man who preferred the vast, silent company of his land to the clamor of human judgment, and now he was thrust into its harsh spotlight. He approached the auction block, his boots crunching on the loose gravel, each step a deliberate commitment to the impossible choice he had just made. Nara, still clutching her baby, watched him approach, her eyes devoid of expression, a careful blankness that betrayed the depth of her trauma. There was no flicker of gratitude, no hint of relief, only a profound wariness, the ingrained caution of a hunted animal. Her people had suffered unimaginable betrayals at the hands of men like him, men with white skin and the power to seize, to destroy. Her silence was a shield, a wall impenetrable. Elias, for his part, offered no explanation, no comforting words. What words could possibly bridge the chasm between their worlds, between freedom and captivity, between oppressor and oppressed? He simply extended a hand, not to touch her, but to indicate the direction they would take. The auctioneer, still visibly vexed, handed Elias a crumpled bill of sale, a sordid piece of paper attempting to legitimize the ownership of a human soul. Elias took it, his fingers recoiling from the touch of the paper as if it burned, a silent testament to the moral repugnance of the transaction. He turned to Nara, his gaze meeting hers for a brief, electric moment. He saw no fear in her eyes, only an unwavering defiance, a quiet strength that both surprised and humbled him. "Let's go," he rumbled, his voice low, almost a whisper against the rising murmur of the crowd. He led the way, a silent, imposing figure, his broad shoulders a bulwark against the stares and whispers that followed them. Nara, after a moment's hesitation, followed, her footsteps light, almost ghost-like, a stark contrast to the heavy thud of Elias's boots. The baby, nestled securely in her arms, remained asleep, oblivious to the momentous shift in its young life. The journey from the auction block to the outskirts of town was a gauntlet of silent judgment. Elias felt the weight of the community's disapproval pressing down on him, a stifling blanket of small-mindedness and prejudice. He could hear the low whispers, the thinly veiled accusations of Indian sympathizer and fool. He ignored them, his focus fixed on the dusty road ahead, on the vast expanse of his ranch land that offered a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the rigid rules of society held less sway. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the desolate landscape, shadows that seemed to stretch out like grasping fingers, hinting at the long, arduous road that lay ahead for both of them, a journey fraught with the unknown. The journey back to Elias's ranch was a tapestry, woven with silence and unspoken questions. The wagon wheels churned up dust, a fine, reddish powder that coated everything, mirroring the pervasive uncertainty that hung heavy in the air. Nara sat rigid, clutching her baby, her gaze fixed on the endless horizon, a stoic sentinel against the encroaching wilderness. Elias, perched on the driver's seat, felt the weight of her presence behind him, an unspoken burden, and a profound responsibility he hadn't sought. He offered no conversation, for what could he say? Words, in this situation, felt futile, inadequate. He glanced at her occasionally through his peripheral vision, noting the sharp, watchful tilt of her head, the way her eyes, though seemingly distant, missed nothing. Her silence was not empty. It was a fortress, built brick by brick from years of hardship and a profound distrust. She was a captive, yes, but her spirit remained unbound, fiercely guarded. He thought of the tales he'd heard, not from books, but from the land itself, from old-timers who had seen the raw, brutal expansion of the frontier. Stories of broken treaties, of massacres, of a people systematically stripped of their identity, their very right to exist. He wasn't a sympathetic man by nature, hardened by the unforgiving nature of the West and his own past failures. Yet, the image of her at the auction block, her silent dignity amidst such degradation, had lodged itself deep within him, an irritating grain of sand in the oyster of his conscience. He had bought her, not out of altruism, a concept he barely understood, but from a strange, unsettling compulsion, a visceral rejection of the casual cruelty he witnessed. What did he expect? Gratitude? Cooperation? He knew better. He knew only the weight of the moment, the responsibility he had inexplicably shouldered. His ranch, isolated and sprawling, was not a place built for softness. It was a rugged expanse of land, a battleground against the elements, against wild animals, against the constant threat of drought and scarcity. How would a woman, a Comanche woman, who had known only the communal life of her people, adapt to such solitude, such stark independence? As they neared the ranch, the stark outlines of his humble cabin and the corrals appeared against the deepening twilight. It was a sparse existence, built for utility, not comfort. Nara scanned the landscape, her eyes discerning details Elias often overlooked. The particular shade of a distant hill, the way the wind rustled through the sparse trees, the subtle signs of life hidden beneath the surface. He wondered what she saw, what she felt: fear, resignation, or perhaps a flicker of assessment, a silent calculation of her chances. He had no illusions about her wanting to stay. She was a prisoner, albeit one he had removed from a worse fate. His only hope was that the sheer vastness of the land, the isolation, would deter any immediate escape attempts. He pulled the wagon to a halt, the creak of the wheels echoing in the profound quiet. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a dramatic backdrop to their unsettling new reality. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and damp earth. Elias swung down from the wagon, his movements deliberate, his gaze fixed on Nara. This was their new beginning, an unspoken pact forged in the crucible of a desperate choice, fraught with unspoken tensions and the heavy burden of history. The first few weeks at the ranch were an uneasy truce, a silent battle of wills fought within the confines of Elias's Spartan cabin and the vast, indifferent landscape. Nara, despite her captivity, moved with an unyielding grace, her actions precise, deliberate. She tended to her child with fierce devotion, her movements a constant, silent rhythm of motherhood. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words were clipped in her native tongue, a melodic cadence that Elias could not understand, yet somehow recognized as a barrier, a shield. He provided her with the basics: food, water, a small cot in a corner of the cabin, but their interactions were formal, transactional. He tried once, clumsily, to offer her a worn blanket, a gesture of meager comfort. She took it without a word, her eyes betraying nothing, her silence a profound rebuke to his awkward attempt at kindness. He was still the white man, the captor, regardless of his intentions. Elias observed her, often from a distance, through the smoke of his pipe, or while mending fences. He saw the subtle changes in her. The hunger in her eyes slowly receded, as regular meals restored some vitality to her gaunt frame. The baby, no longer whimpering from neglect, began to thrive, its small cries filling the cabin with a sound Elias had not heard in years, the vibrant, demanding symphony of new life. He watched Nara forage for herbs, her knowledge of the land seemingly innate, her movements as fluid and natural as the river that snaked through his property. She taught him, inadvertently, lessons about survival he had never learned from his books or his Anglo mentors. She found roots and berries he didn't know were edible, showed him how to track small game with an almost preternatural intuition. It was an unspoken exchange, a silent acknowledgement of skills he lacked and she possessed in abundance. Yet, the wall between them remained. One evening, a fierce dust storm descended upon the ranch, a violent whirlwind that battered the cabin and threatened to rip the roof from its foundations. Elias worked frantically to secure the shutters, the roar of the wind deafening. Through the swirling dust, he saw Nara, not cowering, but standing resolute, her back pressed against the wall, shielding her child with her body. Her eyes, wide with a primal fear, still held that unyielding defiance. In that moment of shared vulnerability, a thin crack appeared in the wall between them. He yelled over the tempest, "Are you all right?" The words were snatched by the wind, but the intent was clear. She simply nodded, her gaze unwavering, a silent acknowledgement of their shared struggle against the relentless power of nature. Later, as the storm subsided, leaving behind a thick blanket of dust and an eerie calm, Elias sat by the flickering lamplight, nursing a cup of coffee. He heard a soft sound and turned to see Nara, her child asleep in her arms, looking at him. For the first time, her face held something beyond wariness, a flicker of something akin to shared experience, a fragile, unspoken understanding, born from the chaos. It was not trust, not yet, but it was a step, a hesitant movement across the desolate landscape of their relationship, a glimmer of light in the profound darkness that had enveloped them. A particularly brutal winter descended upon the ranch, testing the resilience of both the land and its inhabitants. The snow lay thick and unforgiving, cutting them off from the nearest town for weeks on end. Resources dwindled, and the constant battle against the cold gnawed at their spirits. Elias, a man accustomed to solitude, found the forced proximity with Nara and her child both challenging and strangely illuminating. He saw her resourcefulness firsthand, her uncanny ability to make something from nothing, to stretch meager rations, to identify the subtle shifts in the weather that promised a brief reprieve or warned of deeper peril. She used dried herbs to treat the baby's cough, concocted strange-smelling poultices from foraged barks for his own aches and pains. It was a silent testament to a knowledge system that transcended his own, born from generations of living in harmony with the land, not merely extracting from it. One bitter morning, Elias ventured out to check on his dwindling livestock, only to find a calf, barely a few days old, frozen stiff in the snow. He returned, defeated, his face etched with grim resignation. He'd lost too many animals this winter, each death a blow to his already precarious livelihood. Nara, sensing his despair, approached him, her gaze surprisingly soft. She spoke a few words in Comanche, her voice low and comforting, then pointed to the frozen calf. He shook his head, explaining its demise, the futility of it all. She then pointed towards the surrounding woods, her meaning clear. The wild animals, the deer, were a source of sustenance. Elias, though a hunter, had not thought of it. Too focused on his cattle, he nodded, a silent admission of his oversight, his dependence on her quiet wisdom. He set out later that day, guided by her subtle instructions, returning with a deer, a rare bounty that sustained them for weeks. This shared act of survival, this tacit reliance on each other's strengths, slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to erode the hard edges of their initial relationship. During one long, snowbound evening, as the wind howled outside, Elias watched Nara rocking her child by the meager firelight. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on her face, softening the lines of her grief, revealing a quiet tenderness. He found himself speaking, not of the weather or the ranch, but of his past. He spoke of his wife, long dead from a fever, and their infant son, lost to the same cruel illness. He spoke of the emptiness that had consumed him, the reason he had retreated to this desolate land, building walls around his heart higher than any fence. He didn't expect her to understand the words, but he spoke of the feeling, the raw, aching void. He saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a shared understanding of profound loss, a universal language of grief that transcended their spoken tongues. Her own story, unspoken, was undoubtedly a litany of similar tragedies. In that moment, the air between them thinned, the oppressive barrier of their different worlds momentarily lifting. It was not a grand revelation, but a quiet, profound connection forged in shared vulnerability, a realization that pain, like the land itself, had no boundaries, no prejudice. The cabin, once a place of tense coexistence, became, if only for a fleeting instant, a sanctuary of shared sorrow, a silent promise of a future where they might, perhaps, find solace in each other's presence. The embers glowed, a warm, pulsing heart against the relentless cold, mirroring the fragile spark of connection that had ignited within the desolate confines of their shared existence. Spring arrived, slowly at first, melting the snows and bringing with it the promise of new life, but also new challenges. Elias's decision to bring Nara and her child to his ranch had not gone unnoticed in the wider world. Whispers had turned to rumors, and rumors to outright accusations. A rider, a grizzled bounty hunter named Silas Kincaid, known for his relentless pursuit of native runaways and his unyielding prejudice, appeared on the horizon one sweltering afternoon, a dark silhouette against the fiery sunset. He rode with purpose, his very presence a coiled threat. Elias saw him from a distance, a cold dread seizing his gut. He knew why Kincaid was here. Some vengeful townsman, perhaps the very rancher Elias had outbid, had clearly sent him. Kincaid dismounted without ceremony, his eyes, hard and calculating, immediately fixed on Nara, who was tending to her child near the well. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his weathered face. Well, Thorn. Heard you picked up some stray livestock at the auction. Looks like she's a little too valuable to be kept off the books. His words were laced with mockery, a clear challenge. Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Kincaid and Nara, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his revolver. She ain't livestock, Kincaid. She's a person, and she's staying. His voice was low, laced with a dangerous edge, a warning clear as a rattlesnake's hiss. Kincaid scoffed, his eyes narrowing. Laws say otherwise, Thorn. You bought her, but she's still a Comanche. And there's bounties on 'em, live or dead, especially those who ain't accounted for. He gestured vaguely, implying some official authority he likely didn't possess. Nara, hearing the confrontation, moved closer, her child held tight, her gaze fixed on Kincaid, with an intensity that spoke of generations of fear and defiance. She understood enough from Kincaid's tone, his posture, his very presence, to know the danger. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick as the dust that swirled around their feet. Elias felt the surge of protective instinct, raw and fierce, an emotion he hadn't believed himself capable of since his own family was lost. He saw Nara not as property, but as a being deserving of dignity, of life. And in that moment, she was his responsibility, not through ownership, but through a deeper, unarticulated bond. You ride off, Kincaid, Elias warned, his voice gaining a new, unyielding strength, or you'll find out what happens when you mess with what's mine. The possessiveness in his tone wasn't of ownership, but of defense, a line drawn in the unforgiving sand. Kincaid hesitated, weighing the cost, the potential for a bloody confrontation. Elias was known as a man who could handle himself, a formidable opponent. The sun beat down, relentlessly, mirroring the unyielding glare between the two men. Nara watched, silent, her heart pounding against her ribs, the baby stirring restlessly in her arms, sensing the imminent danger. The ranch, once a refuge, had become a battleground, not just for survival against nature, but against the enduring prejudices of a world that refused to let go of its cruelties. The scene hung suspended, a tableau of simmering violence, the fate of a woman and her child hanging precariously in the balance. A raw, primal test of loyalty and newly forged, fragile bonds. The confrontation with Kincaid was the crucible, the moment when the tentative understanding between Elias and Nara solidified into an unbreakable alliance. Kincaid, seeing the unyielding resolve in Elias's eyes, the hand hovering menacingly near his revolver, knew he was facing a man prepared to kill. With a sneer and a string of curses, he turned his horse and rode away, a dark stain disappearing on the horizon, but leaving behind a palpable sense of threat that would linger. His departure, however, was not an end, but a catalyst. It forced Elias to confront the depth of his commitment, not just to a vague sense of right, but to the very lives of Nara and her child. He had chosen to protect them, unequivocally, against the very world he inhabited. The act of standing against Kincaid had irrevocably shifted something within him, shattering the last remnants of his cynicism. He was no longer a solitary rancher merely existing. He was a guardian, a defender, a man defined by a choice he never thought he'd make. Nara, witnessing Elias's unwavering stance, his willingness to risk his own life for her and her child, felt a tectonic shift in her own perception. The white man who had bought her, who represented the very forces that had decimated her people, had chosen to protect her from one of his own. It was an irony so profound it defied immediate comprehension. Her ingrained distrust, a shield she had worn since birth, began to fracture. Later that evening, under the vast expanse of the star-dusted sky, a sky that mirrored the endless possibilities and impossibilities of their situation, she approached Elias. For the first time, her voice was not clipped, but soft, hesitant, as she spoke in broken English, a language she had perhaps learned from traders or previous captors. "Why?" she asked, her eyes searching his, seeking an answer that transcended the brutality of their history. The question hung in the cool night air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Elias looked at her, truly looked at her, seeing past the layers of trauma and cultural difference, seeing only a woman, a mother, who had suffered immeasurably. He saw a reflection of his own lost family, the crushing helplessness he had felt then. He reached for the only truth he knew. "Because," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "no one should be bought, no one should be sold, and no child should grow up without a mother." His words were simple, unadorned, but they carried the weight of his own profound losses, his regret, his nascent hope for a different kind of future. Nara's eyes, previously guarded, softened, tears finally welling, tracing paths through the dust and grime on her face. It was not a sudden flood of emotion, but a slow, quiet release, a dam breaking after years of relentless pressure. She nodded, a gesture of profound understanding, of shared humanity. In that moment, the silent chasm between them finally closed, replaced by a fragile bridge of shared sorrow and a burgeoning, unspoken promise of a different path forward. The vast, desolate landscape, once a symbol of their separation, now became a witness to a moment of unexpected, profound connection, a turning point where past brutal realities slowly began to yield to the possibility of a shared, uncertain future. The spring turned into summer, and life on the ranch began to settle into a new rhythm, one dictated not by ownership, but by coexistence. The shared language of survival, honed by the harsh realities of the frontier, slowly began to give way to tentative conversations. Nara, with the quiet courage that had always defined her, began to speak more, teaching Elias words in Comanche, sharing fragments of her life before the war, before captivity. She spoke of the sacred connection to the land, of the wisdom of the elders, of the vibrant ceremonies and traditions that had once filled her days. Elias, in turn, spoke of his own life, the relentless toil of ranching, the solitude that had become his only companion. Their dialogues were sparse, often punctuated by long silences, but each word, each shared glance, was a thread weaving a new tapestry, binding them in an unexpected companionship. The child, growing steadily, became a joyful testament to their strange, emergent family. It was a bridge between their worlds, its innocent laughter echoing through the cabin, a sound of pure, unadulterated hope in a landscape often devoid of it. Nara's maternal love, fierce and unwavering, was a constant reminder of the sanctity of life, a stark contrast to the casual brutality they had both witnessed. However, the world outside their isolated ranch continued to cast its long shadow. News filtered in through the occasional visitor, a lone rider seeking shelter, a merchant brave enough to brave the isolated trail. The tensions between the white settlers and the remaining native tribes persisted, often escalating into violent skirmishes. Laws were passed, further restricting native rights, solidifying the injustices. Elias knew their precarious peace was fragile, a bubble that could burst at any moment. He taught Nara to shoot, to defend herself and her child, a grim necessity in a land where peace was a fleeting illusion. He saw the grim determination in her eyes as she learned, her movements precise, focused. It was not a desire for vengeance, but a fierce will to survive, to protect the innocent life she carried. One scorching afternoon, as the sun beat down relentlessly, a small group of riders appeared on the horizon, not a lone bounty hunter this time, but men with the official badges of the law, accompanied by a few aggressive townsfolk. They rode with a grim purpose, their faces set in hard, unforgiving lines. The news of Elias harboring a Comanche woman had reached higher authorities, twisting into rumors of abduction, of defiance against the established order. This was not a private dispute but a direct challenge from the systemic forces that had put Nara on the auction block in the first place. The tension that had long simmered beneath the surface of their fragile peace now erupted into the searing heat of the summer day. Elias felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This was the final test, the ultimate confrontation. He looked at Nara, her face pale but resolute, her hand instinctively going to her child. Their eyes met, a silent agreement passing between them. They would not yield. They would fight, not just for their lives, but for the very idea of dignity, of freedom, of the right to define their own existence outside the cruel dictates of a prejudiced world. The dust swirled around them, a chaotic dance mirroring the storm brewing in their hearts, a struggle against a tide that threatened to drown them all. The confrontation that followed was not a flurry of gunfire, but a tense, protracted standoff. A battle of wills etched onto the dusty landscape. The lead lawman, a stout, officious man with a severe beard, dismounted, his hand on his sidearm, his voice clipped and authoritative. "Elias Thorne, we have reason to believe you are harboring a fugitive from the law, a Comanche woman, who by all accounts should be under the purview of federal authority. We're here to take her." His gaze, devoid of empathy, flickered towards Nara, who stood stoically beside Elias, her child clinging to her skirt. Elias stepped forward, his body a shield, his voice calm but imbued with an unyielding resolve that startled the lawman. "She is no fugitive. She was bought at auction, legally, by me. She lives here now, under my protection." His words, while legally sound in their twisted context, also carried a deeper, unspoken defiance, a moral stand against the very legality they cited. The townsmen accompanying the law, their faces etched with prejudice, grumbled, their murmurs growing louder, demanding action. "She's an Indian. She don't belong here," one of them shouted, his voice coarse with hatred. "She's a savage," another echoed, his eyes spitting venom. Nara remained silent, her gaze unwavering, absorbing their insults with a quiet dignity that shamed their bluster. Elias felt a surge of cold fury, but he kept his voice steady. "This is my land, and anyone who steps on it with ill intent will answer to me." His hand, slow and deliberate, moved towards the grip of his revolver. The lawman, caught between the mob's fervor and Elias's dangerous resolve, hesitated. He had not anticipated such defiance, such unyielding commitment. He saw not a man protecting property, but a man protecting life. A truth that, despite his rigid adherence to the law, held a dangerous moral weight. Then, in a moment that cut through the tension like a blade, Nara stepped slightly forward. Her voice, soft but clear, resonated with an unexpected power. She spoke in her native tongue, a stream of melodic rhythmic words, not of accusation or defiance, but of dignity, of her connection to the land, of the simple truth of her existence. Elias, unable to understand the words, felt their profound impact, a testament to her unbroken spirit. The lawman and the townsman, confronted with this unexpected display of unyielding humanity, fell silent, momentarily disarmed by the sheer force of her presence, her unbroken spirit. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths and the weight of a history too brutal to comprehend. Elias looked at Nara, his heart swelling with a fierce pride. She was not a victim, not anymore. She was a survivor, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The decision was not hers to be taken, it was hers to make, and she had made it. The lawman, his face grim, finally lowered his hand. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that this was not a simple arrest, but a moral battle he was unwilling to fight. He could enforce the law, but he could not break a spirit so profound. With a curt nod, he turned, signaling his men to follow, their retreat a silent acknowledgement of defeat. The townsmen, still muttering, followed, their hatred tempered by a reluctant respect for Elias's unwavering stance and Nara's quiet strength. The sun, a burning eye in the sky, seemed to witness their departure, a silent benediction upon the unlikely family left behind. The dust of the lawman's departure settled, leaving behind an aching quiet, a profound sense of exhaustion and relief. Elias and Nara stood together, watching the receding figures, a silent understanding passing between them. The threat, though temporarily averted, served as a stark reminder of the relentless world outside their ranch. A world unwilling to relinquish its prejudices, its rigid categories of ownership and belonging. Yet, in that shared vulnerability, a deeper bond had been forged, tempered in the crucible of defiance. They had faced the system, and for now, they had prevailed. It was not a grand victory, but a quiet triumph of the human spirit, a testament to the enduring power of an individual's choice against the crushing weight of institutionalized cruelty. Their initial relationship, born of brutal circumstance, had blossomed into something resembling kinship, a shared existence based on respect, mutual protection, and an unspoken recognition of each other's humanity. Life on the ranch settled into a new, deeper rhythm. Nara, no longer a captive in all but name, became a partner in the truest sense. Her knowledge of the land, her instinct for survival, complemented Elias's rugged practicality. She helped him locate new water sources, taught him how to read the subtle signs of the changing seasons, how to track game with a silent grace that awed him. The ranch, once merely a collection of buildings and land, began to feel like a home, imbued with her quiet strength, her connection to the very earth beneath their feet. The child, growing steadily, was the vibrant heart of their new reality, its laughter a balm against the lingering shadows of their pasts. It knew no auction block, no historical animosities, only the warmth of its mother's embrace, and the quiet strength of the man who had, against all odds, become its protector. Their story was not one of perfect harmony or a complete erasure of their painful histories. The scars remained, etched into their souls, a constant reminder of the darkness they had overcome. Nara carried the weight of her lost people, her decimated culture, a silent grief that would never truly dissipate. Elias wrestled with the ghosts of his own past, the bitter taste of loss, and the quiet regret of choices made and unmade. Yet, amidst these lingering shadows, a profound hope began to bloom, a fragile, tenacious flower in the harsh desert landscape. They built a life together, not as white man and Comanche woman, not as owner and owned, but as two souls bound by an extraordinary circumstance, forging a path that defied the conventions of their time. They were pioneers of a different sort, not expanding a frontier of conquest, but building a bridge across the chasm of hatred and prejudice, one deliberate, courageous step at a time. The ranch, isolated and wild, became a quiet sanctuary, a symbol of resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners of human history, compassion and understanding could find a way to take root, offering a fragile but enduring promise of redemption. Their story, whispered only to the wind and the stars, was a quiet rebellion, a profound testament to the enduring power of humanity's capacity for change, for healing, and for finding light in the most unexpected of places.